Okay, so today we are going to talk about lipids, and lipids are chemically diverse group of compounds, and the one key feature that they have is that they are all insoluble in water. Okay, and so their function is quite diverse in nature, it turns out. Okay, some lipids like oils and fats, uh, they are primarily utilized um, as the stored form of energy. Okay, so when cells are starving, they are actually mobilized and they are utilized to create ATP. Okay, and some lipids like phospholipids and sterols, they primarily are utilized as structural components, right? They may be part of the membrane, for example, membrane bilayer. There are many types of lipids that are also utilized in other biological functions, and it could be, um, in electron transport. We will talk about oxidative phosphorylations towards the end of this class. And some can be utilized as enzyme cofactors, and some could be utilized, as you will see in the class, as pigments, light absorbing pigments, and so on. Okay, so they are diverse classes of compounds, and they are broadly classified into these five categories. Okay, fatty acids, and we will go over them one by one. Triacylglycerols, which is also known as neutral fat. Then waxes, and then you have glycerophospholipids and sphingolipids. And then we will finally talk about steroids, some isoprene-based lipids. Steroids are part of that. Okay, and if you look at all these molecules, you will notice, as from a chemist perspective, that you will notice that there is a polar end to the molecule and there is a non-polar end. So most biological lipids are amphipathic in nature. Okay, so they do have polar head group and then non-polar end. So before we talk about what their functions are, I want to discuss briefly their nomenclatures. Okay, and so biochemists typically define fatty acids as carboxylic acids derivatives with the hydrocarbon change that ranges from 4 to 36 carbon long. Okay, and it turns out that lipid biochemists utilize, even today, they utilize common names of these fatty acids. And so though they really do not use IUPAC name or some other names that we will talk about in the coming slides, they still utilize their common names. So it is good to know, memorize some of these common names for certain saturated and unsaturated fatty acids. You will see them in some exams, if not in my exam. Okay, so so here we are seeing saturated fatty acids. 12 carbon saturated fatty acid is lauric acid, a common name. 14 carbon is myristic acid, and 16 carbon is palmitic acid, and similarly 18 carbon stearic acid, and so on. 10 carbon saturated fatty acid is known as capric acid, and 8 carbon saturated fatty acid is known as capralic acid. Okay, so the chain itself, the aliphatic chain, hydrocarbon chain, can be saturated, and you are seeing some of those common names for the saturated fatty acids here, but they can also be unsaturated. Okay. So some examples are shown here. You can go over them. Alpha linoleic acid is linolenic acid is an omega fatty acid, omega-3 fatty acid, and we'll talk about that. That's again has to do with nomenclature, right? But you will see that in most monounsaturated fatty acids, the double bond typically lies between the carbon number 9 and 10. Okay. And if there are other double bonds, such as in polyunsaturated fatty acid, known as PUFA, P-U-F-A, they are generally they are generally at carbon number 12 and 15. And one other thing you will notice is that most unsaturated fatty acids, the double bond is almost always in the cis geometry. Okay. So if you basically look here, this we are showing you 16-1, 18, colon 1. These nomenclatures I'm going to talk about in the next slides. Okay. And so, as I said, most most unsaturated fatty acids are found in cis geometry. So what about trans fatty acids? It turns out that trans fatty acids are typically, produced by fermentation in the rumen of certain dairy animals, like cows, for example, or goat. And they come most trans fatty acids come from dairy products and meat as a result. So you may have noticed that some of these ruminant animals, they usually, when they are eating, grazing, they will eat food quite fast, and they will try to collect all the food in early part of the stomach, also known as paunch, rumen, and basically they will simply swallow, right? And then when they are sitting out, they will basically take the food out and bring them back to the mouth, and then they will chew that food slowly, and that's what actually results into the fermentation and formation of trans fatty acids. Okay, so let's talk about the nomenclature. There are two conventions for naming fatty acids. One is shown here in the A, and the second one is shown here in the B. And so let's look at in A. This is the standard nomenclature. You can see that this is a monounsaturated fatty acids, right? And in this nomenclature, what you do is you basically, your carboxylate carbon is carbon number 1. Okay, and the carbon that is attached to carboxylate carbonyl carbon is alpha carbon. Okay, and that's carbon number 2. So alpha carbon is carbon number 2. Very, very important. It's very easy to confuse this in the exam. So make sure you pay attention to that. And then you are seeing this, zigzag line. Each of these lines represents a single bond, right? And you know that single bonds are free to rotate, right? And then you see a double bond between 9 and 10. So if you were to name this fatty acid, you can just write, count the number of carbons. And if you do that from carbon number 1, which is the carbonyl carbon of carboxylate, you'll see that it's an 18 carbon. So you'll see 18. And then colon 1, because it has one double bond, right? So that's colon 1. And then in parentheses, you actually describe the position of that double bond. And that double bond starts at carbon number 9, right? It's between 9 and 10, but it starts from carbon number 9, because numbering starts from left to right in this case, as is written. So you can name this as 18 colon 1 in parentheses delta to the power 9 with a subscript. It basically tells you that double bond is at the 9th carbon, and there is only one. And of course, that the other name is cis-9 octadecenoic acid. That's your IUPAC nomenclature. Okay, so What about the one that is shown here in the B? Now you can see here that this certainly is a polyunsaturated fatty acid, PUFA, right? So if you were to name this using the nomenclature that we just described above, you will be able to see that it's a 20 carbon fatty acid. So 20, and you can see that there are 5 double bonds, cis double bonds. So 20:5, and then in parentheses, you are going to describe the position of that double bond. So delta with superscript of 5, 8, 11, 14, and 7. So those are the position of the double bond. And that's it. That if you wrote just that, that's good. Very nice name for that fatty acid. From that name, you can actually write the structure of fatty acid. So if you were actually, coming to my class, taking the exam the way we do in the classroom, there might be a short answer question where I will say, draw the structure of this fatty acid. And you can do that exercise yourself. Okay, the other nomenclature that is actually quite popular as well among nutritionists and certain biochemists is this omega fatty acid nomenclature. Okay, so if you look here, for that nomenclature, what you define is that you'll see the last alkyl carbon, that methyl group CH3, right? That carbon is known as omega carbon. That's omega carbon number 1, as shown here in the pink. You can see that. Pay attention to that. And so this is an omega-3 fatty acid because you can see that there is a double bond at the 3rd carbon from the omega carbon, right? So this will be an omega-3 fatty acid. It's a polyunsaturated fatty acid. And also there are omega-6 fatty acids. Okay, so omega-6 fatty acid will be where the double bond will start from the carbon number 6, again from the omega side. Okay, so you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You might note that you have a double bond at the 6th carbon, right, in this structure that is in the middle here. Icosapentaenoic acid structure. But this is not an omega-6 fatty acid. This is an omega-3 fatty acid because you have a double bond between 3 and 4 of the omega carbon, right? So that's something that you might want to make a note of yourself. This is very important. Now, it turns out that humans do require, but we do not have the enzymatic capacity to biosynthesize these omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6 fatty acids. And so they must be obtained from our diet. Okay, and they are very, very important for, for a variety of functions, including, trying to maintain a very good cardiovascular health. And so, yes, omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids, they are both considered essential fatty acids. That's why, they are necessary for our health, but we can't make them, right? So we have to get them from food. Now, it turns out that both omega-3 and 6 play a critical role, in biology, for example, in brain function, in growth and development, right? So they are very, very important. They are also important, in making sure your skin and hair growth is maintained. You are maintaining proper bone health. Your metabolism is properly regulated, and your reproductive systems are nicely working. Okay. It turns out that there has been a lot of research on this, and you will see that you often see people trying to sell you omega-3 fatty acids of different kinds, right? But recent research, and I always want to mention that, suggests that there is an optimal ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 that you should try to maintain in your diet. This is very critical. This is, biochemistry right here, useful, something that you can take home. So you need to maintain a proper ratio of omega-6 to 3. And that proper ratio is either you maintain a 1:1 ratio or somewhere between 1:1 to 4:1, but nothing higher than that. You do not want to have, more of omega-6 fatty acid. Why? It turns out that there's been a lot of studies that suggest that omega-3 fatty acids helps reduce inflammation in your body and system. Okay, and some omega-6 fatty acids, they can promote inflammation. Although they're required, they're important in biological function, but if you have more than what is generally required, then they can promote inflammation. Okay, and I just tell my students there is a special type of chronic pain that exists in, let's say, Marines or soldiers who went to serve, the country, and God forbid they lost one of their limbs, in some explosion. They come back home, the surgery, everything is done, but they will continue to have this chronic pain. It's called complex regional pain syndrome, CRPS. It turns out that if you are having higher intakes of omega-6 fatty acids, then you will have these chronic pain conditions, and you might not notice, and you might not know. You will say, I'm doing everything perfect, I'm actually eating enough of my omega fatty acids, but I still have this massive pain and it's never going away. And that is what CRPS is. So what I always tell my students again here is that in American diet, if you look here carefully, the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 is somewhere between 10 to 30 to 1. A lot more omega-6 fatty acids we consume in our American diet. And that could be one of the main reason why a lot of us actually suffer from some kind of inflammation and pain. Okay, so pay attention. This is something that is important for you. So, you might want to pay attention to what you eat. All right. So with that, let's look at some of the physical properties of these fatty acids, right? So I don't want you to memorize anything here, right? Other than some common names, as I suggested. But if you look here in this table, they are showing you saturated fatty acids, at least 1 to 6 of them on the top, right? Their structure, they tell you how many carbons there are, right? And their common names and their melting point. And if you notice that as the number of carbon chain length increases, you see that there is an increase in the melting point. Okay, so increase in the melting point is important, and we will talk about that in the next few slides. So keep that in mind. Yeah, when you have the saturated fatty acids, like from 12 carbon to all the way to 24 carbon, the melting point literally increases of these fatty acids. But if you have even 1 degree of unsaturation, such as shown here in 16:1, right, cis-9 hexadecanoic acid, then you see that their melting point drops dramatically. And this is shown in the centigrade. And so this would be a liquid at room temperature, you can see. An 18 carbon and, with 2 degree of saturation, like that. And you'll see that as you increase in number of degree of unsaturation, you will see that melting point dramatically decreases. And that's something that you should be able to explain as a chemist, as a student of organic chemist. You have taken your organic chemistry, but we will go over that why. I will show you structure in the next slide. And so here, very cool, look here. We are showing you an 18 carbon saturated fatty acid known as stearic acid right here on the left hand side, right? And you can see that this is a saturated hydrocarbon tail, you see, and then polar head group, carboxylate. If you take the same number of carbon but introduce a cis double bond, then you get another fatty acid, monounsaturated fatty acid known as oleic acid. And you will see that that cis double bond introduces a kink in the overall structure. You know that double bonds cannot rotate, right? double bonds cannot rotate, but all these single bonds, they are free to rotate, right? And so because double bond cannot rotate, the structure is quite rigid, it looks like, at least at that position. It creates a permanent kink in the structure. So the packing of fatty acids, therefore, depends on the degree of unsaturation, right? And how many cis double bonds are present. So if you look here in C, they are showing you saturated fatty acids, right? If you have the saturated fatty acids, you can imagine that those single bonds are free to rotate. They can come together and pack much more tightly and form more rigid and organized aggregates, as shown here. Okay, and that would actually increase the melting point of these saturated fatty acids. But if you start to introduce the degree of unsaturation by introducing cis double bond, then you will see that they will not be able to pack as efficiently and as tightly, right? So a mixture of saturated and unsaturated fatty acid will not be able to pack more efficiently, and therefore they will be more mobile, and therefore they will have lower melting point. Why? Because unsaturated fatty acid chains, they bend, right? And they pack in less ordered way, and they allow for a greater potential for motion. So that explains your melting point observation that you saw in the table that we just described in the previous slide. Now, again, about trans fat, and students always are interested in this because they want to know why trans fats are so bad. And trans fats, as I said, they are produced, from they are typically obtained from dairy and meat product, and they are bad, right? Why are they bad, chemically speaking? And that's something that you can look at the structure and right away understand as a chemist. So we are showing you a trans fatty acid, right? At the double bond at the 9th and 10th position is in trans geometry. You can see as in allylic acid, right? And in this vaccinic acid, which is shown here again, the trans double bond is at 11th and 12th position. But remember, this double bond is not free to rotate, right? There is a pretty high activation energy barrier for the rotation around that double bond that you see in the yellow. And so when these trans fatty acids are there, they literally pack almost like saturated fatty acids, okay? Because of their structure, they don't create that kink that cis double bond do. And therefore, these trans fats, when they are present, they will also actually form aggregates. They will be more rigid and they will be less mobile. And so what happens is that, if you have, for example, partially hydrogenated fats, it will contain a lot higher percentage amount of trans fat, and that's bad for you. And if you have trans fat, you will see that trans fat eventually will aggregate, and it will form plaques in your arteries and could raise your blood pressure. And if not controlled properly, it could actually give you heart attack, right? And strokes, etc. Now, we will talk about cholesterol in the coming slides, but I just want to, mention that, cholesterol is very important for our biochemistry, okay? All cholesterol isn't all that bad. It's actually essential fat that provides much needed support in the membranes of our body's cells, okay? And we will talk about that a little bit later on. And so there is, cholesterol comes in two flavors, basically, okay? One is known as HDL, high density lipoprotein, right? HDL cholesterol. HDL cholesterol is considered well behaved, okay? It's considered good cholesterol. Why is it considered good cholesterol? Because it acts as a scavenger, Okay, it goes around in the bloodstream, and as it goes around, it will actually go and remove what we call LDL, the bad cholesterol, harmful cholesterol, okay, from the places where LDL doesn't belong. So it's literally is basically HDL is is doing the job of policing to ensure that LDL doesn't stick around where it shouldn't be. And so high HDL levels, if you have, it will actually reduce the risk for heart disease. Okay, but if you have low levels of HDL, then it will increase the risk for heart disease. Okay, that's something that you might want to keep, and that's what is shown here in the picture that I just added this morning. You can see that eventually your arteries will become thick and thick if these molecules aggregate, and it will actually raise the blood pressure, and it can literally block it if God forbid, and that could be a problem. Could give rise to stroke. Cool. Okay, so that brings me to the second part of the second class of the lipid molecule, which is triacylglycerols. Okay, triacylglycerols are known as neutral fat. And what are they? They basically, you take the fatty acids, right, and you make an esters with, you take the glycerol molecule, which is shown here, and you make an esters with fatty acids. Okay, so that's what they are shown here. So you can see here on the right hand side, they have taken the glycerol molecule and they have made an ester. You can see the ester linkages with 3 different types of fatty acids. And when the fatty acids on carbon number 1 and 3 are different, then the carbon number 2 becomes chiral, right? So that's why you can see. Anyway, so triacylglycerols, it turns out the neutral fat is the main form of storage fat that you have in your body, okay? It's the major energy source for many organisms. And when we talk about fatty acid metabolism, we will show you that how that happens. Okay, and it is also utilized as an insulation. So a lot of these polar bears, they are like nice and stocky. And two things it does. The fat storage does in them. One, it provides a major source of energy, so they can hibernate, etc., and still be alive. But also provides a solid insulation for them from a very cold environment. So why triacylglycerols are major source of energy? It's because, as you will see, major portion of the molecule is this saturated fatty acids, right? And so if you look at those structures, you will see that you have most reduced form of carbon in nature that you can have in these fatty acids, right? And so most reduced form of the triacylglycerols, of carbons in triacylglycerols, it actually is very useful for energy storage. Why? Remember what I told you in the beginning? The way we obtain most of our energy is that we take reduced fuel and we oxidize them using molecular oxygen, right? In that process, we create ATP and burn the fuel, which would be, let's say, carbon, into carbon dioxide and water, right? So oxidation of triacylglycerol, it turns out, gives more than twice as energy gram for gram as the oxidation of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, if you remember structure of carbohydrates, those carbons are oxidized. Remember, there are a bunch of hydroxyl groups attached to them, right? So it's an ideal form to store energy, right? You have most reduced carbon. And the other good thing about this is that because they are non-polar in nature, most of the molecule, you do not need any solvation, right? So you don't need any solvation. Therefore, you can pack these molecules very efficiently for storage, right? And so those are the 2 reasons why triacylglycerols are considered a major energy source. Very cool the way nature has worked this out. Now, again, I tell my students to look at this slide and just read this. Okay. And this tells you why you should eat more of Mediterranean food than what the traditional American food is, like burgers and double Whopper, whatever that is, the McDonald's is selling for $1. If you can afford, of course, you should try to eat more Mediterranean food, which means simple pasta with lots and lots of olive oil. Why? It turns out that you can actually take different types of fat and um, and see the content of fatty acids, right? So they have color coded. If you have olive oil, which you know exists as a liquid at room temperature, and the reason it likely exists as a liquid at room temperature is because it has a very high degree of unsaturated fatty acids, as shown here. Remember in the middle here, C16 and C18 unsaturated fatty acids are shown by this color. And you will see that that is the maximum amount in olive oil, right? Saturated fatty acids are very tiny amount, right? Compared to, let's say, butter. Butter comes in the middle here, which is usually a soft solid at 25 degree. And you will see that distribution is almost, you have more and more of saturated fatty acids, but you do have, maybe almost 1/3 unsaturated fatty acids. So butter is okay. But what is terrible in this? Terrible is beef fat. Okay, look here. Again, you will see here that more than half of the fatty acids comes from C16 to C18 saturated fatty acids. And that's why beef fat is a hard solid at room temperature. Cool? So when you eat beef fat, basically it's going to get into your system and in your blood, which is aqueous medium, it will actually aggregate, right? And if it is not taken properly and metabolized properly, and if you have any conditions, then it will actually start creating plaques and start clogging your arteries slowly. Cool. Now, this slide used to be fun for my students when I would be in the class, but we are not in the class. So I'm going to tell you the what I always talk about on this slide. This is, the reason I throw this slide, because when I started learning biochemistry, so my background is very different. I did my master's degree in physical chemistry. So I loved thermodynamics and quantum chemistry and that kind of thing when I was young. But when I came for my PhD here to stay in States, I actually got very interested in biochemistry. And when I saw this information that I'm showing you here, I was quite surprised. And so, and there is a story that goes along with it. When I was coming to States, my friend told me to, not eat too much of pizza. And I looked at them and I says, why? I mean, that's something that I'm really looking forward to, because when I came to this country, it was 1996 and there was no pizza in India, right? So I was like, I am just going to fill myself. Why do you say that? And they says, no, pizza is going to be really bad and it, will give you heart attack and you will become obese and, all kinds of problems and we worry about you. Every friend advised me and of course, our family members. And so when I saw this, I really laughed to myself and I says, wow, something that I thought was bad is really not that bad. And that's why this slide here. They're actually showing you the amount of trans fatty acid contents in different types of snacks here. Okay, and types of snacks that are shown here in the left-hand side. And in the extreme right, you will see that percentage of total fatty acids. So if you were to ask me before I saw this, will you eat fish burger, breaded fish burger? And I would say, of course, I am going to eat fish burger, breaded fish burger over pizza, because I am pretty sure, pizza has a lot of trans fat and it's just going to make my health go bad. But look here, it turns out that pizza is one of the lowest amount of trans fatty acids in pizza. Okay, 9%. The other surprising part was chocolate bars, very tiny amount. But what are the worst one? Donuts, corn tortilla chips, breaded fish burger, chicken burger, and French fries. And that's, something that I thought I always show my students so they can make good choice. Okay. Anyway, so let's keep moving along. And now, so you'll be curious, right? Okay, chemically it makes sense that the best storage fuel that nature has created is this neutral fat, triacylglycerol. You can pack them efficiently. They don't require water of hydration. And the carbon that are present in those fatty acids are in the most reduced form. And because they are in the most reduced form, we can strip away many, many electrons from them. We can oxidize them in a very efficient manner. And therefore, the more we oxidize them, the more energy we will produce, and so on. So perfect. Makes sense. And so polar bear dilemma. It turns out that polar bears, they live in very cold environment, right? And they are surrounded by ice. And so when they need to, go hibernation, for example, to weather the very, very cold weather, typically what they do is they go and hunt for seals. Okay, and these seals have very high contents of fat in them. Okay, it's just a globule of fat in seals. And so polar bears, obviously, it's ice is too cold and seawater is too salty, so they cannot drink water during those times, right? And so they must have a way to produce metabolic water that their metabolism needs. How do they survive? So yeah, so it turns out that what they do is before going into hibernation, they actually go and munch on those fatty seals, and they pack themselves with fat. And when they go in hibernation, they basically utilize that fat, deposit of fat, and they metabolize them. Okay, so they take molecular oxygen and reduced form of fat, and they will generate carbon dioxide and water. And that water that is generated, metabolic water that is generated, is being reutilized for the biochemistry that their cells have to do. And so because they do not eat any protein rich meal, right, like salmons, for example, they are able to avoid going to the bathrooms. They are not actually metabolizing any protein, so they don't produce any urea. And so they don't need to go and urinate or go to the bathroom for months, and they can actually conserve their precious body water by doing this. Pretty cool, right? Okay, so the third class of the fatty acid is waxes. And waxes are also insoluble in water, and you will see their chemical structures. I'll show you in the next slide. And you see waxes in various places, like in certain types of skin of an animal and fur that are wax coated, and they are mainly to repel water. So water doesn't wet those animals. They are found in many plants and bird feathers. When you go for your car wash, sometimes actually you might be using Caranaúba wax that actually comes from a palm tree in Brazil, and it actually is utilized, to give this high gloss finish that you see in your boats and automobiles and etc. shoes. And then lanolin. Lanolin is a wool wax that actually comes from a special kind of sheep. And if you remember a lot of advertisement on TV, oil of Olay actually comes from that, and it's actually really good for your skin. So what are waxes? Waxes are basically, you have long chain alcohols that are esterified to long chain fatty acids. So you'll see structure on the left here. You see stearic acid here, right? and that has been esterified with oleoyl alcohol. Okay. So oleoyl alcohol esterified with stearic acid is right here. So that's the chemical structure. And so if you have, this is another one, you can see typically these chemical formulas are named after the acid, right? So this is 16 carbon fatty acid. So palmitic acid esterified with 16, 17, 18 carbon alcohol. So that's stearyl palmitate. That's how you name them. And so this is the general formula of wax, and this is the bee wax, chemical structure of bee wax you see in this figure. Okay. Oh, these are my favorite plants, and they are my favorite because they don't require much attention and they remain beautiful. I still remember having this plant for many, many years, and oftentimes I'll forget watering them in my office, and they never complained. And once I remember, after months, I will water them and they come back alive. And their surfaces are coated with waxes, and so they really, they don't have any water loss pretty much. And so they are pretty cool to have them in your living room, if you like. Now this is quite a busy slide, right? And this is the fourth class that we will talk about, some types of storage lipid. We just talked about triacylglycerols, right? And some structural lipids, which are part of the membranes, and they mainly play role as a structural role in biochemistry. So if you look here, I know it's a very busy slide, but the message is very good and clear here, okay, on these slides, okay. If you look here on the left-hand side, I'm showing you the storage lipid, neutral fat, triacylglycerols. You saw that molecule was an ester, triester of fatty acid on glycerol, right? And so, but if you look across this, you are seeing three color coding, right? One is in pink, which is the backbone of these lipids. And then you see parts that are in yellow, right? Yellow parts are typically this non-polar part, which is typically long chain alkyl group, right? And fatty acids in most cases. But this in archaebacterial ether lipids, it's a special type of ether lipids that I will show you the structure in a minute. And then in the blue is what we call polar head group. Okay, so polar head group, you don't have any polar head group in triacylglycerol, but you do have polar head groups in all other types of lipids shown here. Okay, so membrane lipids that are polar, typically they are classified in three different categories: phospholipids, glycolipids, and then this archaebacterial ether lipids, a class of its own. And so if you again look in phospholipids, they are classified in glycerophospholipids lipids and sphingolipids, and we'll show you the structure of them chemically in a minute. Okay, but you can see here that glycerophospholipids has two fatty acids that are esterified to the glycerol backbone, and the third one has a polar head group as shown here, right? Sphingolipids, the backbone is an 18 carbon alcohol known as sphingosine. Okay, and there the fatty acid is connected to the sphingosine backbone in an amide chemistry. Okay, and we'll talk about, I'll show you the structure again. And so the membrane, when you are seeing here, especially, I think let's talk about this when I show you the structure. Okay, but there is a lot here. You can see that they are trying to show you that archaebacterial ether lipids has a special ether linkages as shown here in the dashed lines, right? Both sphingolipids, here you'll see that there is only single fatty acid, right, in the amide conformation. Galactolipids and sulfolipids has two fatty acid in ester linkages with the glycerol. So, and these galactolipids, we will not have time to talk about them, but galactolipids make up for about 70 to 80% of total membrane lipids in plants, and they are localized in the internal membrane of chloroplast that actually is involved in photosynthesis, right? Okay, so let's look at the chemical structure. It's much more fun to look at the chemical structure, right? So here I'm showing you the common glycerophospholipids. So you can see here, you can see the backbone of glycerol, esterified with two fatty acids, right? One saturated and one unsaturated. And then you have this head group X that is in phosphodiester linkages with the glycerol backbone, okay? And so X can be anything, and X can be, a variety of groups, and they're all found in nature. And I just want to mention here that we used to have an amazing biochemist in our department named Bob Bittman, and he was world-renowned lipid biochemist. He literally made some amazing discoveries when the lipid biology was just starting to explode. And it is a very rich biochemistry. Many of the functions of the lipids were not known when Bob Bittman started working on them. So he really had a very prolific career. We really miss him in the department. We lost him to cancer. Yeah, it's something. Whenever I teach this chapter, I really wish that he was around and we could invite him, and so you can say hello to him. Anyway, so what I want to show you here is that I do not want you to memorize the structure of any of these polar head groups. All I want you to know is the basic structure of the parental compound. Okay, that's good enough for you. But I want you to still appreciate the beauty of this, right? And so you can see that depending on what kind of polar head groups are on these glycerophospholipids, these molecules can exist in different types of charge status, right? So at neutral pH, if it X is H, it will have a net charge of -1. But if it's phosphatidyl inositol 4,5-bisphosphate, then it will have a net charge of -4. Sometimes it can have a net charge of 0 if the polar head group is ethanolamine. So it tells you that these things, the physiochemical properties of these polar head groups must play a very specific role in biochemistry, right? In terms of where these molecules go and bind, right? They would create specificity so that only certain molecules will go and bind to their own receptors, not anything else, right? So specificity is kind of built into these molecules. Some glycerophospholipids also have ether-linked fatty acids, and I'm showing you on the left is this molecule called plasmalogen. And plasmalogens, they have this ether-linked alkenyl chain. You can see here, I'm showing you. Okay, where that most glycerophospholipids have ester-linked fatty acids, right? I just talked to you about. So plasmalogen is a special lipid, as you are seeing, with an ether-linked alkene, which is highly enriched in your heart tissues. Okay, heart is a special tissues. Remember, it keeps on like working Every second, second, it's breathing in, breathing out, pumping oxygen to the tissues. And so to have that kind of strength in those heart muscles, there are special chemical components that play important role in keeping the heart working and healthy. And so plasmalogen is one of the ether lipids that actually is present. 50% of all heart tissues have this kind of lipids. On the right hand side is a molecule known as platelet activating factor, okay, PAF. PAF is, this molecule that you are seeing here. This molecule, when it is released, it is a potent molecular signal for the formation of clot. Okay, so if you get a cut and if blood is starting to come out, if you hold that place, you will eventually see that a clot will form and your blood will stop flowing, right? And that simple process of clot formation, thrombosis, what we call, happens because a series of biological events happen. Okay, and in that series of biological event that happens, this molecule plays a critical role. Okay, platelet aggregation factor, activating factor. What are platelets? Platelets are these specialized cells. Okay, and they are smaller than the red and white blood cells, and they are really extremely important. They play a very important role in the sequence of events that actually leads to the formation of a blood clot. Okay, so that's molecule. You will see that this molecule, just stare at it, right? You'll see that interestingly, it has an ether linked alkane right there on the top, right? But the second fatty acid is very small. Actually, it's not a fatty acid. It's just an acetyl ester. Ah, okay. And then the polar head group is choline right here. So think about how this could be an important, just based on the simple structure, you stare at it and you say, wow, I wonder why the structure is the way it is. Why not a second fatty acid at the second carbon of glycerol? Why such a shorter acid? And that makes sense if you think about its function. Remember, platelet activating factor plays a role in formation of blood clot. So it has to be happy in aqueous medium, right? So it makes sense to have, a very small ester, fatty acid ester, if possible. And so acetyl ester serves as a very good role here, so that this molecule is not too hydrophobic and still remains soluble and reaches its receptor so that the blood clot formation starts. Beautiful, right? Yeah, so this is why I tell chemistry is so important, right? You can see structure plays such important role in function, and they may have played such fascinating roles in biological evolution. Okay, so this is the unique one, Archaea one, right? It has a very unique structure. So if you look at this molecule, you'll see that there are two glycerol moiety, one on the left and one on the right. Okay, and they are connected together by this ether. This is not an ester. You can see an ether linkages. Diphatenyl group, right? That's diphatenyl group. What is diphatenyl group here? These are long hydrocarbons that basically is, 8 5-carbon isoprene unit. So 5-carbon isoprene unit is shown here on the left hand side, you can see, and 8 of them come together to form this diphatenyl group. So if you count just that, single bond right here, if you're seeing my cursor, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. Okay, so 8 isoprene units of 5-carbon. And so they are condensed end to end, right, to glycerol, carbon number 2 and 3, right? You can see here. And so this kind of structure is very unique. Remember, archaea evolved on their own. If you remember my first lecture, we talked about that. And so you can see how distinct their evolution is, even in terms of their lipid composition here. You see polar head groups that are shown here in the blue on the right hand side, which is glycerol phosphate. And then on the left hand side, you see a disaccharide, right? Glucose and galactose linked in 1 to 2 glycosidic linkages. So those are the two polar head groups on two ends. And they're connected together with these diphatenyl groups, right? But one more interesting thing people found out is that this, if you look at the glycerol carbons, it's chiral, right? It is attached to 4 different groups, that carbon number 2 right here in this right hand side I'm showing you here. This is typically S in bacteria and humans, but in archaea, it's R configuration. Okay. And so this is, this is how the tetraether lipids are organized in archaea. All right, so let's talk about sphingolipids. Remember, and sphingolipids are, represents another class of lipid molecules that are often found in biological membranes. And the backbone itself, as I said before, is an 18 carbon alcohol. Okay. And so a fatty acid, the fatty acid actually is joined to this sphingosine backbone in an amide linkage. Okay. And that linkages are known as ceramide. Let's look at the chemical structure, much more intuitive to enjoy, right? So here I'm showing you the structure, general structure of sphingolipids. It's nothing but they have written to you so you still feel that it is like glycerol. Remember, glycerol has 3 hydroxyl group, right? And 3 carbon. They have written the sphingosine structure. It has only 1 alcohol group here, free one. Okay. The first carbon, there is an alcohol that is actually connected with a polar head group. The second carbon here, you are seeing the fatty acid that is in amide geometry. And the third one is nothing but the backbone itself. They have just written it the way they are showing you here. Okay. And so when the polar head group is X, the parent molecule is ceramide. Okay, you should know the parent name of the each classes ideally. Okay, so as I said, first 3 carbons, at the polar end, right, are similar to the 3 carbons of the glycerol right here, 1, 2, 3. And you see that C2 has an amide linkage, right? And that fatty acid is usually saturated or sometimes monounsaturated, okay? But it can have different length of carbons from 16 to 24. There is one molecule that actually you may have heard or may hear in future plays a very important role in neuronal transduction in brain is this ganglioside. Okay, gangliosides are these major constituents of your neuronal cell membranes. Okay, and they have typically you can see that they have a very typically very complex sugars, oligosaccharides head group. Okay, and they function by recognizing specific molecules at the cell surface. Okay, and thereby when they interact with those proteins on the cell surface, they regulate their activities in the plasma membrane, certain proteins embedded in the plasma membrane. Okay, and of course, I don't want to expect you to memorize the structure of these, but you know that each of these sugars have specific symbols. It turns out that 60 different sphingolipids are identified in human. You chemists have isolated 60 different types of sphingolipids, but the functions of a lot of them are not known yet. So there is a lot of still opportunity to make discovery in this very fascinating area of research. If you look at their shape, in terms of molecular structure, you can actually literally build a space filling model. This is a phosphatidylcholine, which is nothing but, polar head group is ethanolamine, right? You can see the choline structure linked with this phosphodiester linkages. That's the structure of glycerol right here. 3 carbons you are seeing, right? And those are the fatty acids. So this is glycerophospholipids. If you build the space filling model, it will look like this. And if you build a model for sphingomyelin, which uses sphingosine as the backbone, you will see that structure looks like this. And like it or not, they're very similar. You can see that they have a polar head group, right? And they have non-polar tails. So sphingolipids, turns out that, human blood groups, for example, when we talk about blood group O, A, and B, how do you determine what kind of blood groups there are in people? They are typically determined by the types of sugar, oligosaccharide head groups that are attached to this glycosphingolipids. So you can see that they're showing you sphingosine, right, with the fatty acid in the amide geometry structure. Then they're showing you 3 sugars here: blue circle, yellow circle, and yellow square. They're all same in O antigen, A antigen, and B antigen. But the sugars that are attached to those 3 are different. And so these are, typically this kind of structures, glycosphingolipid structures, are found on certain blood proteins. And that's what determines what kind of blood group you have. And there are simple tests you can do to figure out what your blood group is. Okay, so in terms of degradation, how are these lipids degraded, like phospholipids, glycerophospholipids, or sphingolipids? How are they degraded? And it turns out that whenever their functions are not needed, they are taken to the lysosome, where we have all these proteases and lipases, enzymes, that will actually take these molecules and degrade them into their individual components, chemical components. Okay. And so we are showing you here lipases, and it turns out, what is a lipase? A lipase is an enzyme that will basically hydrolyze phospholipids into fatty acids and other lipophilic substances. Okay, and there are 4 major classes of phospholipases: A, B, C, and D. And in this figure, they are showing you 2 classes of A and a C and a D type. Okay, and if you look at phospholipase A1, it will basically cleave the ester bond at the first carbon of the glycerol, SN1 acyl chain, what we call it formally. Okay, phospholipase A2 will cleave second acyl chain, SN2 acyl chain. Okay, and when you have phospholipase B, it can cleave either 1 or 2, okay, or both. Okay, that's not there on this slide, but that's what it does. Phospholipase C actually cleaves before the phosphate group. So phosphate is right here, if you see in the bottom, right? And so you see a bond here. There you can see phosphodiester bond, one here that is connected to this sugar, right, diphosphate, and the one that is connected to the glycerol here. So one before the phosphate, right, That's the one phospholipase will see. And when it does that, it will release diacylglycerol on the top, right? And a phosphate containing head group right here at the bottom. And so, yeah, phospholipase C, they play a very important role in signal transduction, and they release what we call second messenger called inositol triphosphate. Okay, we're not going to talk about that too much, but yeah, very important molecule. Phospholipase D, this will cleave after the phosphate, releasing this, phosphatidic acid and an alcohol. And so these are, typically this is how phospholipids and sphingolipids are degraded typically by phospholipases. This brings me to talking about the fifth class of molecules called sterols. Remember, we talked about cholesterol briefly, bad cholesterol and good cholesterol in the earlier slides. Yeah, if you want to look at the structure of the cholesterol, it actually is shown here, right here on the left-hand side. It plays a major role, structural role. And cholesterol has this, ABCD ring, okay? What we call steroid nucleus. All of cholesterol derivatives have this ABCD, cholesterol nucleus, okay? And on D, at the 17th carbon, you see long alkyl side chain that exists. It has a very tiny polar head group. Although cholesterol is considered very hydrophobic, but it is amphipathic. It has a hydroxide group right there. And so when you need to actually store and transport your cholesterol, oftentimes this hydroxyl group will go and condense with a fatty acid to form what we call sterol ester. And that sterol ester is then transported and stored into adipocytes. Okay. On the right hand side, I'm showing the structure of a very important molecule called bile acid. Okay, taurocholic acid. Bile acids, why are they needed? Remember, gallbladder that actually releases bile acids. Bile acids are actually synthesized in your liver and stored in the gallbladder. Okay, and they are needed especially when you are eating fat-rich meal. What will gallbladder do? It will release this molecule called taurocholic acid. And what this molecule will then do is that it will act as a detergent. It is an amphipathic molecule that will go and solubilize the fat that you have ingested in your food, so that lipases can actually get access to these molecules. So those molecules, fatty acids, can be broken down into their individual components so we can utilize them. Your cells can utilize them. So they literally are used as an emulsifying agent for digestive lipases. And if you look at the structure, it tells you, look, it's a little bit more polar. There are a couple of hydroxyl groups, right? Extra here. And then the non-polar alkyl side chain is now replaced with this taurine molecule, a sulfonate here, which will be much more charged. And so you can see that this is polar edge of the molecule, and this is non-polar end of the molecule. So that's how it acts as an amphipathic molecule and as a detergent. So it solubilizes any fat, neutral fat that you may have consumed from your diet. Cool. Now, these are sterols, right? These are steroids. What are steroids? Steroids are the oxidized derivatives of sterols. Okay, so you can see that that long chain alky chain is been removed from these molecules. Instead, you see a hydroxyl group. So they are oxidized derivative of sterols, right? Cholesterol, for example. On the top two, you are seeing testosterone and estradiol. This is male sex hormone that is produced in testis. And this is estradiol, one of the female sex hormone that is produced and stored in ovaries and placenta. In the middle, you are seeing this molecule known as cortisol and aldosterone. Cortisol and aldosterones are these hormones that are synthesized by your adrenal gland. Adrenal gland, you know where it is? It sits on the top of your kidney. And these two hormones play a very, very important role in glucose metabolism and excretion of salt, etc. And of course, they have many other functions as well. The two molecules are seen here at the bottom on the left-hand side, prednisolone and prednisone. My apology, I'm a little bit, they are tongue twister for me. These are basically synthetic steroids, okay? And so they are, often given to by doctors when you have inflammation. They are anti-inflammatory compounds. The one that are shown here on the right-hand side is simply a growth regulator that are usually found in vascular plants. Okay, so steroids obviously are more polar than sterols, right? Cholesterols, and you can appreciate that when you look at their structures. They are more oxidized than cholesterol, right? Now, it turns out that vitamin D3, I'm not sure if you are from Asian origins, it is likely that you may be suffering from vitamin D3 deficiency. You may not know it when you are young, but when you get little older like me, you will notice the deficiency much more acutely. Okay, this is vitamin D3 is absolutely a very, very important molecule shown here in the center on the top, and it is extremely important in the metabolism of calcium, and that happens in kidney, in bones, and your intestine. Very, very important. And for that to happen, you need these hormones shown here in the right hand side. Okay, it's called 1,25 dihydrocholecalciferol. Okay, right here. Okay, so how do you produce this? It turns out that the biosynthesis starts from this molecule known as 7-dehydrocholesterol. Okay, they're showing you this bond between 9 and 10 that actually gets cleaved in 2 steps by UV lights. Remember, they always say that it is good idea for you to go and get some sunlight so that you can generate vitamin D3. This is the step that happens when you do that. Okay, in your skin, in 2 steps, 7-dehydrocholesterol will be converted to vitamin D3, cholecalciferol. And then when that happens, that molecule is then goes to the liver. Okay, and liver has this very specific enzyme that will hydroxylate this carbon number 25. Okay, it's a hydroxylating enzyme. And then what happens? Look at the biochemistry here. Then that molecule is taken up by the kidney. And kidney has this very specific enzyme that will hydroxylate the carbon number 1. Look how compartmentalized the biochemistry is here. And that's when you produce this 1,25 dihydroxycholecalciferol, the hormone that is important in calcium metabolism. Okay. And so if you don't get enough vitamin D, you can get a disease called rickets. And rickets is a disease which basically leads to, softening and weakening of your bones. Cool. Now, at the bottom, I'm showing you these units that exist in another fat soluble vitamin known as vitamin A. Okay, and if you look here, vitamin A1 known as retinol. Okay, vitamin A1, which is retinol, you can see that it's an alcohol. It is produced from this molecule known as beta carotene. Basically, they're showing you different places where you can break these isoprene units to create this vitamin A, retinol. Beta carotene is found in tomatoes and carrots. You see the orange color and reddish color. That's because of the presence of beta carotene. Conjugated double bonds, as you are seeing here in the left hand side of beta carotene molecule. But anyway, we are seeing new enzymes will break that bunch of enzymes and they will create vitamin A. And then that vitamin A, which is an alcohol, oxidizes to create this with the help of an enzyme, create 11-cis retinol. Remember, this is an aldehyde. You saw this molecule before. We talked about it. This is the visual pigment that when the visible light falls on this molecule will undergo isomerization, cis to trans isomerization. So you will produce all trans retinol, and that's what gives rise to the neuronal signal to the brain. So you can visualize things the way you visualize it. That's the biochemistry of that. We talked about that. But if you can take 11-cis retinol, which is an aldehyde, retinal, Al, aldehyde, and you can oxidize it to create retinoic acid. And then that retinoic acid is very, very important. It's a hormonal signal to the epithelial cells. It plays very, very important role during the development. Okay. And so, yeah, retinoic acid, I think about 25 or 30 years ago, it was shown that retinoic acid can act as a ligand for certain transcription factors that were then called as retinoic acid receptors. Okay, they are nuclear receptors, and they were extremely, extremely important in switching these retinoic acid receptors from potential repressors to transcriptional activators. Okay, so they played a very, very important role. Absolutely fascinating biochemistry during the development stage. All right. Some other biologically active isoprenic prenoid compounds are shown here. Again, don't try to memorize the structure of any of these. I'm not going to ask you to write. If you can identify, that's good enough. But other than that, you don't need to worry. They are actually showing you the isoprene units with these dashed pink lines. Vitamin E here, shown here, is an antioxidant. Okay, it scavenges free radicals that may have been produced during metabolism or some oxidative processes. B, they're showing you vitamin K, which is a blood clotting cofactor. Very small structural differences are enough so that the function of E and K are very distinct, and you can appreciate that by when you stare at the structure. In molecule C, they are showing you a blood anticoagulant, warfarin. Warfarin is a blood thinner. It actually reduces the formation of blood clots. It is used to treat or prevent blood clots that can form in veins and arteries, right? And it can reduce the risk of stroke and heart attack and such serious conditions, especially in people who are prone to developing heart attacks. In D, I have highlighted because you will be seeing this molecule again and again later on when we talk about oxidative phosphorylation. It's the molecule known as ubiquinone. Ubiquinone is a mitochondrial electron carrier, and it plays a very, very important role in transporting electrons between the respiratory chains. Okay, so these are some examples. Now, I also show these slides that you can see they can also, lipids can also play a role as a pigment, in certain birds and plants. And shown here is these two carotenoid pigments. You can see the structure of this molecule on the top. If you have this molecule, you will be bright red, as shown here in this bird on the top. And if you have slightly different looking molecule, you can see structural chemical structures are slightly different. You have completely different color, bright yellow color molecule, right? And so these, male and female, they actually go and feed on different types of seeds. And they process different types of lipid molecules like the one shown here in terms of intestinal accumulation, and therefore they look the way they look. Okay, so even if they fed the same seed that contained both of these pigments shown here on the left hand side, one bird may not actually bring it in the epithelial cells of its intestine, and therefore it will not utilize that molecule. It will just get excreted. Okay, so it's very fascinating how things are, how small structural difference can make such difference in chemistry and look. So this is almost the final slide, I guess one slide before the final, which basically tells you how lipids can be extracted. If you are interested in studying certain lipids, right, you can take a tissue, maybe liver here, and you can homogenize it, right, in chloroform methanol water mixture. So you know that methanol and water will mix, but chloroform and methanol water will form two layers, right? And so typically, when you take them into the separatory funnel, you will see that the bottom layer will be chloroform, and the top layer will be the methanol water layer. And so when you try to separate them, you can separate them by either using chromatography, such as adsorption chromatography. You simply take a column and fill with different types of stationary phase, porous material, and different types of lipids will interact differently with the stationary phase, and some will interact more favorably than others. And if the ones that are not interacting properly, they will elute out first, right? So in this case, maybe a second tube had those, third tubes. And so you can actually see that, the neutral lipids are coming out first, and then the polar lipids are coming, and then their last ones are the charged lipids that are coming. You can also take the sample from the chloroform and run a thin layer chromatography, where you spot it on a thin layer plates. And as the solvent moves up, it will actually separate different fractions of the lipids based on their polarity again. And so you can fractionate them this way. And then what you can do is that, remember, your fatty acid, will have fatty acid component, will have lipids will have fatty acids, and likely an alcohol molecule, right? And so if you really want to identify them, what kind of lipids you have, fatty acids you have, what typically scientists do is that they will take those lipids and they will do what we call trans-esterification reaction. Okay, what do you do in that reaction? They will take the lipid molecule and they will throw those in sodium hydroxide and methanol and boil it. What that will do is that will form fatty acyl methyl ester. Okay, so methanol, the alcohol portion, alcohol will actually go and make the methyl esters of all fatty acids in your sample. Okay, that is important, because once you have just the methyl ester of all different types of fatty acids, then it is easy to run through gas liquid chromatography or HPLC or mass spec, and you try to identify what that fatty acid is in your tissues. Okay, and so this is just shown here. One of the method, you can actually determine the composition of fatty acid structures by mass spectrometry, and they are showing you this tandem mass spec experiment. Different fragments will show signature peaks in your mass spec, and you can take them and feed them into a computer algorithm, and that can literally tell you what the structure of your fatty acid is. Okay. And so that concludes our chapter. Let me stop the recording, and then I will take some questions.